Speed Race, one of the few forgotten gems of Roblox, a game that once amassed thousands of players, yet such a small community of only a few dozen. Speed Race, a game of wonder and hope, where people competed against each other in vain, where people didn't compete on the same level of fame as other games, but for the inner dwellings of themselves. Ladies and gentlemen, Speed Race is not your ordinary speedrunning game. It's not even your ordinary speedrunning community. This is a story about how one of the smallest speedrunning communities came together in the face of catastrophe and in the face of forgetting. This is the story of Speed Race. The history of Speed Race started with a group chat. It started with a group of 5 friends who were interested in this newly developed game that had just released around the time of 2017. And so immediately they set their sights to optimizing the game. However, some were certainly better than others. Potato is a true legend of the game. One of the oldest veterans around, Potato was one of the original 5 players to optimize Speed Race past its humble beginnings in 2017. Renowned for his innovative style of play, Potato would hold the top spot from January to April of 2020. His main competition at that time was a player named Lunar, who himself had a brief reign at the very start of the game. With these two, the history of the Speed Race champion begins, a title designated to who reached the top spot of the game's main skip category. Here's what a few of the top players had to say about Potato and his reign. John, what's one word you would use to describe Potato and his innovations to the game?
Just so fruitful.
Veg, what's one word that you would use to describe Potato and his innovations to the game? Wow.
I don't know, pioneering? I don't know.
What are your thoughts on Speed Race player Potato and his innovations to the game?
Pretty smart.
Okay, thank you. Vegeta's mom, what are your thoughts on Speed Race player Potato and his innovations to the game? Okay, thank you. So, in case you haven't realized yet, that era was pretty trash. Aside from the fact that the game was new to speedrunners and hardly optimized, there was hardly any video recording back then, and a lot of the history of that era is lost to time as a result of a moderator accidentally deleting general chat. However, when April of 2020 rolled around, Potato's untouchable dominance was suddenly challenged by 2 new kids on the block, Senna and Arnie. And just like that, Potato was gone and never took the #1 ranking again, and neither did Lunar. This was the second era of Speed Race. Just kidding. Unfortunately, there was no epic war against Arnie, or at least it's exaggerated, as Senna would quickly dispatch Arnie off to retirement after a brief battle for number 1. This is when the game really started to take off, as at around June of 2020, Senna was showing some real dominance, although his tactics were very unpopular at the time. As Senna racked up more and more world records, he refused to show videos of his records to hoard faster strategies from other players, and so the closest anybody could touch him was a player named Matthew, but still, this was not anywhere near Senna's total. Senna had made Potato look like a joke. In only a few months, he became easily the most dominant player Speed Race had ever seen, and there were few signs he was going to slow down. At least, that was true. Until the Arthro Revolution. But wait, what is Arthro? To understand the change the game underwent in May of 2021, you have to understand how the game fundamentally works. Speed Race is a game with 48 maps. Your sole objective is to run from the start of the map to the end of the map in any means possible. Of course, excluding glitches. For every world record that you hold, for every map you complete the fastest, this is one more world record that's added on your tally, which is out of 48. In the era of legends like Senna and Matthew, this was simple. At the cost of 100 Robux for a private server subscription, you could essentially get any world record in the game. It was relatively simple back then, with no major flaws in the game, and not many maps had skips. But that all changed on May 19 of 2021. It had only been a few months since Arthro's discovery, and Senna's dominant reign was over. So, what had just happened? It's simple. Arthro. You see, Speed Race did have one fundamental problem. The taller you were, the further you could jump and reach ledges or take corners. And when players Boost Bomb and Skelly found out that by paying up to $12, body part packages known as Arthro can make you taller, let's just say the game descended into chaos between multiple players for a scramble to dethrone Senna and become the new Speed Race champion. During this period, a ton of new players would finally break through the mold and become champ contending players. It's time we introduce you to some of the names you'll be hearing regularly from here on out throughout this video. You had John, also known as Nuglei, and Demon MP7, the 12-year-old skipless promise. You had Obi, who had been specially trained by Potato for years leading up to the Arthro Revolution. You had Skelly, the first dominant player of the Arthro era and a monster at skips and movement. You had myself, Chris, the other annoying 12-year-old with some skip promise. You had Boost Bomb, the pioneer of Arthro and an all-rounder built on consistency. You had Q, the third 12-year-old who was famously once trapped in a box and almost died. And finally, PP, the greatest Xbox Speed Race player of all time. These players would continually battle it out for number 1 in the wake of new skip discoveries and new Arthur potential, and this era saw 4 new Speed Race champions: Skelly, Peepee, Nuglei, and Obi. This era was insanely competitive, and the former untouchable reigns of Potato and Senna now seemed like relics of the past. It's time we talk about server drama. After the initial scramble for champion, John, or Nuglei, was on track to beat Skelly in the quest to maintain champ and looked to be right on the heels of another dominant reign. However, the drama emerging from the server at this point was unheard of and had been largely ignored throughout this video. There were 2 main factions within the server at this point: traditionalists and changers. Traditionalists supported screenshot proof and FPS unlocker only tricks, while changers supported video proof and banning FPS unlocker. FPS unlocker was under heavy fire at this time because of 2 tricks that were prevalent. Firstly, there were edge hits. These were high bouncing jumps that occurred when you hit a ledge on high FPS, and these completely changed the skip category. Secondly, there were crisp bounces, or CBs, and these were high FPS only jumps on water or other surfaces that would normally kill you. These arguments gripped the server during this period, and drama was rampant. Wait. Time out. Hello everybody. I started working on this video perhaps about a year ago, this documentary, and you see, I kind of fills out in motivation, and I decided to return to it a year later, but unfortunately, since then, I've forgotten how to do a lot of my editing skills using this program, and I don't feel like I'll be able to do the documentary justice if I'm able to finish the whole thing now. So, from this point on, I'll be delivering a condensed history of Speed Race up until the present day, which is, as I'm recording this, December 2025, and I apologize for the time cuts or any loss of detail that might ensue. Now, on with the documentary. So anyways, we left off talking about controversies. So what were the controversies gripping the community at this time? Well, as you just heard, of course, there were the CVs, there were the edge hits, but perhaps the biggest controversy that began to emerge was surrounding QKR. So you see, QKR was a player who emerged from literally nowhere. He joined the server, uploaded 20 world records, even reached a number 1 spot, and then seemingly disappeared. And many people within the community were very suspicious of QKR. Some accused him of being a hacker, others accused him of being somebody's alternate account. But the truth is that QKR was likely neither of these. In fact, QKR was a Korean player who was unfortunately bullied out of the community because people simply didn't know who he was, and he couldn't communicate who he was. So this is definitely one of the more darker sides of Speed Race history because we lost a fantastic player. But rest assured, QKR was one of the most skilled skipless players, and his world records were pivotal in transforming the game's history. Partly as a result of the controversy surrounding QKR and some of his ties, it became more and more apparent every day that the server was heading towards video proof. And after an overhaul decision by Potato following a lost poll, it became clear. The history of Speed Race integrity would be the history of video proof. Now, a lot has transpired since this documentary was made initially a year ago, and I figured it wouldn't be fair for me to fit in the rise of Noah, the rise of Rube, and so many aspects of Speed Race history in this documentary. So this will simply be a part 1. However, I will leave you on this cliffhanger. Speed Race is at a crossroads. John is beginning to become more dominant. There's beginning to be a clear player who leads the pack. So who will be the one to stop the rise of the greatest of all time? Come back to part 2 to see where Speed Race heads in 2025. Thank you.